The day I discovered my grandfather's fortune wasn't lost but hidden was the same day his murderer tried to break into my apartment. I suppose I should have expected it. After all, $2 billion doesn't just disappear without someone noticing. My name is Natalie Chen, and until 3 weeks ago, I was just another overworked architect at a prestigious firm in Manhattan, designing luxury spaces I could never afford. Then my grandfather, the infamous Michael Chen, founder of Pinnacle Investments, died in what police called a robbery gone wrong at his modest Boston apartment. Modest, that was the word that kept appearing in the news reports. How the mighty Michael Chen, once worth billions before his company's spectacular collapse 5 years ago, had been living in a one-bedroom apartment, apparently penniless after investor lawsuits and government fines had stripped him of everything. The funeral was small, attended mainly by distant relatives, hoping against hope that the old man had squirreled away something for them. My Uncle Richard, who had been my grandfather's right-hand man at Pinnacle before the collapse, delivered a eulogy that sounded more like a business presentation, complete with thinly veiled references to lessons learned and the price of ambition. I sat in the back row, uncomfortable in the only black dress I owned, watching my relatives size each other up as potential rivals. None of them had spoken to my grandfather in years. None except me. Miss Chen. The lawyer approached me after the service, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his handshake firm but not aggressive. Martin Wells, I handled your grandfather's affairs. He left something for you. Richard materialized beside us, his eyes narrowing. Martin, I wasn't aware my father left anything for anyone. Just a few personal effects, Wells replied smoothly. Nothing of financial value. Richard's disappointment was palpable. Well, Natalie hardly needs keepsakes. She saw him every Sunday for the past 5 years while the rest of us were dealing with the fallout from his crimes. I met my uncle's gaze steadily. Those Sunday visits meant something to him. And to me. How touching, Richard sneered. Did he happen to mention during those touching visits where the missing investor funds went? $2 billion doesn't just vanish. He was found innocent of theft, I reminded him, though the words sounded hollow even to me. The courts have ruled that my grandfather hadn't stolen the money, but they never determined what had happened to it either. Pinnacle's collapse remained one of the greatest unsolved financial mysteries of the decade. Wells cleared his throat. If you'll come by my office tomorrow, Miss Chen, we can handle the paperwork. The personal effects turned out to be disappointingly mundane. My grandfather's collection of first edition mystery novels, his chess set, and an old worn peacoat that seemed at odds with the crisp suits I always remembered him wearing. He was very specific that these items go to you, Wells said, sliding the paperwork across his desk. I ran my fingers over the soft wool of the peacoat. This doesn't even look like something he would wear. Your grandfather changed considerably after Pinnacle's collapse, Wells offered. Perhaps his tastes simplified along with his circumstances. I nodded, though something felt off. Grandfather had been many things, but simple was never one of them. That night in my apartment, I examined the items more carefully. The books were beautiful but unremarkable. No hidden messages or secret codes jumped out from their pages. The chess set was the same one we'd played with during my Sunday visits, each piece familiar under my fingers. The coat was the puzzle. I held it up, studying the worn elbows and frayed cuffs. It looked like something a dock worker might wear, not the man who had once graced the cover of Forbes. As I ran my hands over it, I felt something strange in the lining, a stiffness that shouldn't be there. Using a pair of small scissors, I carefully cut along the inner seam. Inside the lining was a thin, leather-bound journal, its pages filled with my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. Property is merely a concept, the first page began, and concepts can be reimagined. I stayed up all night reading the journal, my hands trembling as I turned each page. It wasn't a confession or an apology. It was a roadmap. The $2 billion hadn't been stolen, it had been hidden, converted into physical and digital assets scattered across the globe using a complex system of transactions that left no paper trail. The journal detailed everything: locations, access codes, conversion protocols. But more chilling were the names. My grandfather had identified 6 key people he believed had orchestrated Pinnacle's downfall. He called them the architects, and my Uncle Richard was one of them. They thought they were destroying me, my grandfather wrote. They didn't realize they were setting a trap that would take years to spring. The final entry was dated just 3 days before his death. Everything is in place. Natalie will understand what to do. She always sees the patterns others miss. A sharp knock at my door made me jump. It was 3 a.m., too late for visitors. Through the peephole, I saw Richard standing in the hallway, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled, his eyes darting nervously. "Natalie, open up. I need to talk to you about the will." I quickly hid the journal under my sofa cushions. "It's the middle of the night, Richard. It's important. Your grandfather, there might be more to his estate than Wells let on." My hand froze on the doorknob. How would Richard know that unless I can come back tomorrow? I called through the door, making a split-second decision not to let him in. "This can't wait," he insisted, his voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before. "Open the door, Natalie." Instead, I quietly gathered the journal, my phone, and my wallet, shoving them into a backpack along with some clothes. The fire escape outside my bedroom window wasn't ideal, but it beat facing whatever had brought my uncle to my door at this hour. As I climbed down the metal stairs, I heard the splintering of wood above me. Richard hadn't been alone, and they weren't waiting for an invitation. I spent that night in a 24-hour diner, nursing endless cups of coffee as I read and reread the journal, trying to understand what my grandfather expected me to do with this information. By morning, I had a plan, or at least the beginning of one. The journal's first set of coordinates led me to a small bank in Zurich where a safe deposit box contained exactly what my grandfather promised: bearer bonds worth $50 million, a USB drive, and a set of keys. "Your grandfather said you would come," the bank manager told me as he led me to the private viewing room. He was very specific about the timing. "The timing?" The manager checked his watch. "Yes," he said, "if you arrived before today, I was to turn you away. If you never came, the contents would be donated to charity next month. But if you arrived precisely between days 18 and 25 after his death, I was to give you full access." 18 to 25 days, specific enough to be deliberate. But why that time frame? The USB drive provided the answer. It contained surveillance footage from my grandfather's apartment on the night of his murder. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m. as a figure in dark clothing entered through the balcony door. My grandfather, surprisingly alert for that hour, didn't seem shocked by the intrusion. "Right on schedule," I heard him say in the footage. Richard always was punctual, even for a murder. The camera captured everything: my uncle's face as he removed his mask, their conversation about the missing billions, and finally, the moment when Richard plunged a knife into my grandfather's chest. "You'll never find it," my grandfather gasped as he fell. "I don't need to," Richard replied coldly. "Once you're dead, I can take my time searching. No one else knows it exists." But my grandfather had known this was coming. He had planned for it. The 18-day delay suddenly made sense. It was the exact amount of time the police would hold the crime scene before releasing the apartment back to the estate, which Richard controlled as executor. My grandfather had given me a head start, but not a large one. If I had understood the journal correctly, there were 5 more locations, 5 more pieces to recover before I could fully unravel what my grandfather had done with the missing billions, and more importantly, prove who had really been behind Pinnacle's collapse. The second location took me to Singapore, where a seemingly ordinary painting in a private gallery contained microscopic etchings that, when viewed under a special lens included with the safe deposit box contents, revealed account numbers and passwords to digital assets worth hundreds of millions. In Hong Kong, a storage unit rented under a false name contained hard drives with evidence implicating 3 more of the architects in a conspiracy to manipulate markets and destroy Pinnacle from within. With each discovery, I pieced together my grandfather's true narrative. He hadn't been the villain in Pinnacle's collapse, he had been the scapegoat. The 6 architects, his most trusted executives and partners, had orchestrated the company's downfall, siphoning off assets and manufacturing evidence that pointed to my grandfather. But instead of fighting back immediately, he had disappeared the remaining assets, bided his time, and meticulously documented everything. He had created an elaborate posthumous revenge, with me as its executor. By the time I reached the 4th location, a small law firm in London, Richard had figured out what was happening. My hotel room was ransacked while I was out. A man in a dark suit followed me through Piccadilly Circus. Anonymous threats arrived by text message. You're in over your head, Natalie, Richard himself finally called to tell me. Your grandfather was a manipulative old man who's using you as a pawn from beyond the grave. Whatever you think you're doing, stop now. Before you kill me too? I asked. A pause. I don't know what you think you know, but you're making dangerous accusations. I have the footage, Richard, from grandfather's apartment. He knew you were coming. Another, longer pause. Then you understand this isn't a game. $2 billion buys a lot of influence, Natalie. People far more powerful than you want this to stay buried. Is that why you killed him? For the money? I killed him because he was going to expose everything. The money is just an insurance policy. His voice hardened. Walk away now, and you can keep what you found so far. More than enough for a comfortable life. But I had seen my grandfather's full plan now, and it was breathtaking in its complexity and justice. The final 2 locations would complete the puzzle, revealing not just the remaining assets but putting into motion a sequence of information releases that would expose the architects to regulatory agencies worldwide. It was never about the money for him, I realized aloud. It was about the truth. Richard laughed bitterly. Michael always did know how to dress up greed as principle. Don't be naive. But as I followed the trail my grandfather had left, moving from London to Dubai to a remote island in the Caribbean, I came to understand that my grandfather's plan went beyond personal revenge. He had created a financial dead man's switch. If executed correctly, it would not only expose the conspiracy that destroyed Pinnacle but would return the missing funds to the investors who had lost everything. The final location was the most surprising of all, my grandfather's modest Boston apartment. According to his journal, he had hidden the master key to the entire system in plain sight, somewhere even Richard would never think to look. Returning to Boston was dangerous, but I had no choice. Richard would surely be watching the apartment, knowing it contained the final piece. I needed a distraction. Using the resources my grandfather had left me, I orchestrated simultaneous information leaks to financial authorities in 3 countries, each containing partial evidence against the architects. As expected, the resulting chaos, including the arrest of 2 of Richard's co-conspirators, drew his attention away from Boston long enough for me to slip into the apartment. The place had been thoroughly searched, furniture overturned, walls opened, floors pulled up. Whatever hiding place my grandfather had chosen had withstood Richard's desperate attempts to find it. I stood in the center of the destruction, trying to think like my grandfather. Where would you hide something so important that even someone who knew you well wouldn't find it? The answer came as I remembered our Sunday chess games. My grandfather had always said that the best hiding place was one disguised as something else, something so familiar that no one would think to question it. The chess set from his personal effects, the one I'd inherited. Back in my hotel room, I examined each piece carefully until I found it, the black king with a nearly imperceptible seam around its base. Twisting it revealed a small compartment containing a microchip and a handwritten note. Natalie, if you're reading this, you've solved the puzzle as I knew you would. The final key is encoded in the microchip, but it will only activate when synchronized with the other 5 components you've collected. Once activated, the system will transfer the remaining assets to the recovery fund for Pinnacle's investors and release the complete evidence package to authorities worldwide. Richard and the others will have nowhere to hide. I'm sorry for putting this burden on you, but you were the only one I could trust, the only one who saw me as a person, not a fortune. The world believed I stole billions, but the truth is I've spent 5 years ensuring those billions would find their way back to their rightful owners, while those truly responsible face justice. You have a choice now. Activate the system as I've designed it or walk away with what you've already found. I would understand either decision, but know that you were never a pawn. You were always my queen, the most powerful piece on the board. With love and faith, Grandfather. That night, as I connected the microchip to the assembled system, I thought about choices and consequences. My grandfather had spent 5 years in exile, bearing the world's hatred, working toward this moment of posthumous vindication. Richard had killed to protect a fortune built on betrayal, and I had followed a trail of breadcrumbs that led to this moment of decision. The system activated with a simple command: justice, not vengeance. Within hours, financial news outlets worldwide were reporting the sensational return of the missing Pinnacle funds, accompanied by irrefutable evidence of the conspiracy that had destroyed the company. Richard and the remaining architects were arrested as they attempted to flee the country. 6 months later, I stood at my grandfather's grave, now marked with a simple headstone rather than the unmarked plot Richard had hastily arranged. "You should have trusted me while you were alive," I told him, placing a chess piece, the Black King, on top of the stone. "We could have done this together." The wind rustled through the cemetery trees, and for a moment, I could almost hear his voice. "You've always seen the patterns others miss." I smiled despite the tears forming. The inheritance my grandfather had left wasn't the money, all of which had gone back to the investors as he intended. It was something far more valuable. The truth, meticulously documented and preserved against all odds. As I walked away, my phone buzzed with a notification from Martin Wells. There was one final item in my grandfather's estate, a small property in the mountains that had somehow been overlooked in the initial accounting. "Nothing valuable," Wells assured me. "Just a cabin he purchased after Pinnacle's collapse. But legally, it's yours now." Something told me this wasn't an oversight, but the final move in my grandfather's grand design. What would I find there? Another puzzle? A simple place of retreat? Or perhaps just a note saying goodbye? Whatever awaited me in the mountains, I knew one thing for certain. My grandfather had reimagined the concept of inheritance. He hadn't left me wealth or status or power. Instead, he had left me the most valuable asset of all, the chance to rewrite history with the truth. And that was a responsibility I would never take lightly.